The call came at 3:47 inches the morning. Not a knock. Not a ring. My phone lit up the dark ceiling of my bedroom with a number I didn't recognize. And something in my chest told me to answer it before the second buzz finished. Is this Elena? The voice on the other end was hushed. Almost a whisper. Like whoever was speaking didn't want to be heard. This is a nurse at St. Correction. Carmichael's. We have your brother here. He listed you as his emergency contact. I was already sitting up. Which brother Daniel? He came in through the ER about 40 minutes ago. I didn't ask any more questions. I already knew. I hadn't spoken to my brother in 11 months. Not because I wanted it that way. Because his wife, Renée, had made it very clear the last time I visited that I was not welcome in their home. Not welcome in their lives. And not welcome near her husband. She said it with a smile, which somehow made it worse than if she'd screamed it. Daniel was 31. 2 years younger than me. And for most of our lives, he had been the kind of person who filled a room without meaning to. Loud laugh. Big gestures. The type who remembered everyone's birthday and showed up to help you move without being asked. When he was diagnosed with lupus at 26, it knocked the wind out of all of us. But Daniel least of all. He adapted. He learned his limits. He kept working. Kept joking. Kept being Daniel. Then he met Renée. I drove to the hospital in 17 minutes. I know because I watched the clock on my dashboard the entire way, counting the minutes the same way I used to count tiles on the kitchen floor when I was a kid, and something scared me. Old habit. The ER waiting room smelled like antiseptic and burned coffee. A man in a yellow jacket was asleep across 3 chairs. A child with a wrapped hand sat beside a woman who was rubbing her back in slow circles. I went straight to the desk and said my brother's name. The nurse who came to get me was the one who had called. Young, with tired eyes and a careful expression. She walked me to a curtained bay at the end of the hall and stopped just outside it. I want to prepare you, she said quietly. He has 2 cracked ribs, a laceration above his left eye that required 8 stitches, and bruising consistent with repeated blunt force to the back and shoulders. She paused. He told the intake nurse he fell down the stairs. I'm telling you what the doctor documented. I pulled the curtain back. Daniel was lying against the raised mattress, his left eye nearly swollen shut. A white bandage crossing his forehead. His right hand was wrapped. He looked smaller than I remembered. He looked like someone had tried to fold him in half. When he saw me, he turned his face toward the wall. You didn't have to come, he said. I know, I said. I pulled the plastic chair close to his bed and sat down. I'm here anyway. It took him 2 hours to talk. I didn't push. I sat in that plastic chair and I watched the monitors, and I handed him water when the nurse brought it, and I didn't ask a single question. I had learned a long time ago that the people who need to say something will say it when they're ready. And rushing them only teaches them that your need to know is more important than their need to feel safe. Just after 6 in the morning, with the sky outside the narrow window going from black to a bruised gray, he said, It's been going on for about 8 months. I kept my voice flat. Okay. It started small. She'd grab my arm. Hard. When she was angry. He stared at the ceiling. I told myself it wasn't a big deal. I told myself I provoked it. You know how you do that? I know. Then it got worse. His throat moved. My medication. She started controlling when I could take it. Said I was using it as an excuse to be lazy. She'd hide it sometimes. Or she'd take it out of the bottle so I thought I had doses left and I didn't. He closed his eyes. I had a flare last month. Worst one since I was diagnosed. I ended up in bed for 9 days. She told her family I was faking it. I felt something cold and careful settle in my chest. Not anger. Not yet. Something more useful than anger. Does she know you're here? I asked. She knows I left the house. She doesn't know where I went. He finally looked at me. The good eye. The one that wasn't swollen. She texted me on the way here. You want to know what it said? Tell me. He reached for his phone with the wrapped hand, unlocked it, and turned the screen toward me. Don't bother coming back if you're going to pull this drama. You are not as sick as you pretend to be. This is embarrassing. I read it twice. I handed the phone back to him. I breathed in through my nose, out through my mouth. The way I'd learned in the 2 years I spent working as a patient, advocate for a domestic abuse resource center before I went back to school for my paralegal certification, I had sat across from women and men who had shown me texts like that. And I had learned not to react in the moment. Because my reaction was not what they needed. What they needed was a plan. Daniel, I said, I need you to listen to me carefully. Are you listening? He nodded. You're not going back there tonight. You're not going back there at all until we have a plan in place. Do you understand what I mean by a plan? He was quiet for a moment. Then Elena. She's my wife. I know she is. And she cracked 2 of your ribs. I leaned forward. You have a chronic illness that she has been weaponizing against you. That is not a rough patch. That is abuse. And it has a name. And there are things we can do about it. He didn't say anything. But he didn't look away either. I called my supervisor at 7:15 and told her I had a family emergency. She didn't ask questions. I went back to Daniel's Bay with 2 cups of machine coffee that tasted like hot water that had heard rumors about coffee. And I sat down. And we started making a list. The first thing he needed was his medication. Without it, a flare could put him in the hospital for real. And I wasn't going to let that happen. The second thing he needed was documentation. The ER records were already being created, but I'd seen enough cases to know that records alone weren't always enough. The third thing he needed was somewhere to go. You can stay with me, I said. That's not a question. She'll come to your apartment. She can come. She can stand on the sidewalk, and she can come. I said it evenly. My building has a security desk. She doesn't have a key. And if she causes a disturbance, that's its own kind of documentation. He wrapped both hands around the cup. For the first time since I'd walked through that curtain, something in his face shifted. Not relief. Not yet. But the beginning of something. The moment when a person realizes they are not completely alone. What about my things, he asked. My equipment. I have a CPAP machine at home. Some of my medical records. My will get everything. One step at a time. Renee called twice while we were still in the hospital. Daniel silenced both calls. The third time, she left a voicemail. He played it on speaker. Softly. And we both listened. Daniel. I don't know what kind of story you're telling people, but I want you to think very carefully before you do something you can't take back. I have been nothing but supportive of your illness, and everyone who knows us knows that. Call me back. He looked at me when it ended. Save that, I said. Donde la tête. Don't respond. We left the hospital just after 9. I drove. He sat in the passenger seat with his arms folded carefully, protecting his ribs. Watching the city go by in the morning light like he was seeing it from a very long distance. My apartment was on the 4th floor of a building with a doorman named Marcus, who had been working the desk since before I moved in. When we came through the lobby, Marcus took one look at Daniel's face and said, "Good morning. You need anything, you let me know." And I have never been more grateful for a person who understood how to read a situation. I got Daniel settled on my couch with his medication. I had a spare of 2 of his prescriptions because I'd quietly kept an emergency supply after the first time he'd mentioned Renee was managing them, and a blanket and the remote control. And then I went to my desk and opened my laptop and started working. I want to be clear about something. The 2 years I spent as a patient advocate before my paralegal certification were not glamorous years. I made almost nothing. I ate a lot of canned soup. I sat in fluorescent-lit offices with people who were exhausted and frightened, and I helped them fill out forms and understand their options and find the language for what had happened to them. I was 24 years old, and I had no idea what I was doing half the time. But I showed up. And over time, I learned things you cannot learn from a textbook. I learned that documentation is power. I learned that timing matters. I learned that abusers almost always underestimate the people they've hurt. Because the entire architecture of abuse depends on keeping those people small. Renee had spent 8 months trying to keep Daniel small. She had not accounted for me. The first thing I did was request a full copy of Daniel's ER records. As his emergency contact and with his signed authorization, I was entitled to them. I also asked the ER social worker, a woman named Patrice, who came by at my request to flag the records with an observation about the injury pattern. Patrice had been doing her job for 16 years. She knew exactly what I was asking and why. The second thing I did was contact a family law attorney named Howard, who I knew from my advocate days, and explain the situation. He took a consultation call that afternoon. He was calm and specific in the way that people who have seen everything tend to be. He told us about emergency protective orders, about the process for getting Daniel's personal belongings removed from the house legally, about what documentation would be most useful. "Has she ever threatened him in writing?" Howard asked. "She texted him the night of the incident." I said, "We have it. Screenshots. Every platform. Every message you can retrieve." The third thing I did, and this one was harder, was call my mother. My mother and Renee had a relationship I could only describe as careful. My mother had never said a bad word about Renee directly. Not in my presence. But she had a way of going very still when Renee's name came up. The way you go still when you hear a sound, and you're not sure what it is yet. She loved Daniel. She had also, I suspected, I known something was wrong for longer than she'd admitted. Even to herself. When I told her what had happened, she was silent for a long moment. Then she said, "Tell me what you need me to do." Renee showed up at my building on a Thursday. I knew she would. It had been 5 days since Daniel left. And she had moved from voicemails to text messages to, apparently, a personal visit. Marcus called up to my apartment from the desk. "There's a woman down here asking for your brother. Says her name is Renee. Don't let her up." I said, "Thank you, Marcus." She stood in the lobby for 40 minutes. I know because Marcus told me afterward. She was polite at first. Then less polite. Then loud enough that Marcus had to ask her to lower her voice. She left without making a physical scene, which I had half expected. But she sent Daniel a text from the parking lot that said, "I know he's up there. This is not over." Daniel showed me the text. His hands were steady. "Save it." I said. He saved it. 2 weeks after the hospital. We went back to the house for his things. We did not go alone. Howard had obtained a civil standby, a police officer who accompanied us to ensure no confrontation occurred. Renee knew we were coming because Howard's office had given proper notice. She was there when we arrived, standing in the doorway in a linen blazer, arms crossed, watching us with an expression that I recognized from my advocate days. The expression of someone who is used to being in control and is performing composure because losing it in front of witnesses would cost them something. The officer stood near the door. Daniel moved through the house methodically. The way I'd coached him, only his belongings. Nothing disputed. No conversation with Renee beyond the necessary takes act. He found his CPAP machine in the back of a closet. He found 4 months of medical records in a shoebox under the bed, slightly water damaged at the edges. The way something gets when it's been moved around to keep it out of reach. He found his grandfather's watch in a junk drawer in the kitchen. Despite the fact that Renee had told him several times that she hadn't seen it, he didn't say anything about the watch in the house. He put it in his bag, and he kept moving. When we were done, he walked to the door. Renee said his name once. He turned around. "You're making a mistake," she said. Quiet. Controlled. He looked at her for a moment. This woman he had married. This person he had loved. This person who had hurt him. And then he turned back to the door and walked out. I followed him. The officer closed the door behind us. I won't pretend the months that followed were easy. Because they weren't. Daniel had a bad flare in October. 2 months after he left. He was in bed for 6 days. His lupus had been destabilized by months of medication disruption. And the rheumatologist was direct with us. It was going to take time to get things back to baseline. And there might be permanent effects on his kidney function that we'd have to monitor. I sat beside his bed during the worst of it, and I helped him track his symptoms, and I made sure he took everything he was supposed to take at the times he was supposed to take it. And I didn't think about Renee at all. She didn't deserve the space in my head. The divorce proceedings started in September and moved slowly the way these things do. Howard was patient and thorough. Renee hired an attorney who sent a letter suggesting that Daniel had mischaracterized events and that she had witnesses who could speak to his episodes of erratic behavior language that made Daniel go quiet for a whole afternoon when he read it. "She's going to say my illness is a mental health issue," he said. "She's going to try." I said, "And we have 8 stitches, 2 cracked ribs, a hospital record, a social worker's observation, 6 months of text messages, a voicemail, a controlled medication log showing the irregularities, and 2 witnesses who can speak to the pattern of isolation." I paused. Let her try. He almost smiled. The hearing was on a Tuesday in February. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. The way government spaces often are in contrast to their importance. I sat behind Daniel and Howard at the plaintiff's table, and I watched Renee across the aisle, and I thought about the nurse who had called me at 3:47 inches the morning and said he listed you as his emergency contact, and I thought about Daniel turning his face to the wall when I walked in, because he was ashamed. Not of what had been done to him, but of being seen. I thought about all the people I had sat across from in that resource center who had turned their faces away. Howard presented the documentation. The ER records. The social worker's flag. The medical records showing the disruption in Daniel's medication schedule, cross-referenced with the dates of the most severe flares, the texts, the voicemail, a declaration from Daniel's rheumatologist describing the medical consequences of the medication tampering in language that was quiet and precise and devastating. Renee's attorney argued that the injury was accidental, that Daniel had a complex illness that made him unreliable as a witness to his own experience, that Renee had been a devoted and patient caregiver. The judge was a woman in her late 50s, with reading glasses on a beaded chain and the expression of someone who had heard a great many things and was not easily moved. She listened to both sides without visible reaction. When she spoke, she was direct. She noted the pattern of documentation. She noted the medication interference, which she described in terms I will not quote here but which were not gentle. She granted the protective order. She made specific findings of fact in the divorce record that would follow Renee in certain legal and professional contexts for a long time. She looked at Daniel at one point and said, "The court wants to acknowledge that chronic illness is not a credibility issue." Daniel didn't cry. He sat very still, the way he had been sitting still for months. The careful stillness of a person who has learned to hold themselves together through sheer effort of will. But I saw his shoulders drop. Just slightly. Just enough. We didn't talk much on the drive home. We stopped at a diner 2 blocks from my apartment. The kind with vinyl booths and laminated menus and coffee that is aggressively mediocre. And we ordered breakfast even though it was 3 in the afternoon. Because we felt like it. Daniel put his grandfather's watch on the table between us. He'd been carrying it in his pocket every day since we got it back from the house. "She hid this for almost 4 months," he said. "I asked her about it so many times." "I know." Small things like that. That was half of it. I think. Just small things. Making me feel like I was losing my mind. He turned the watch over. You can't describe those to anyone. They don't sound like anything. They sound like everything to me. I said. He looked up. I know exactly what you mean. I said. And I believe you. I always believed you. He put the watch back on his wrist. It fit. We ate our breakfast. Outside the window, the February light was thin and pale and very cold. And the street was full of people who had no idea what had just happened in a small courtroom 2 blocks away. And it didn't matter. Because the only people who needed to know were sitting in a vinyl booth, drinking bad coffee, and not needing to say much else. There are things I want to say to anyone watching this who recognizes something in Daniel's story. Chronic illness does not make you less credible. Needing help does not make you weak. Loving someone who hurts you does not mean you deserved it, or that you chose it, or that you could have seen it coming. The people who are best at this kind of harm are the ones who do it slowly, in small increments, in ways that are hard to explain to someone who hasn't felt it from the inside. If you have someone in your life who is in this situation, to be what I tried to be for my brother. Be consistent. Be present. Don't push. Don't make your need for information louder than their need to feel safe. Show up at 3:47 inches the morning when the number is unfamiliar and something in your chest tells you to answer. And if you are the one in the hospital bed, turning your face toward the wall because you are ashamed of being seen, you don't have to explain yourself to me. I already believe you. The only question that matters right now is whether you'll let someone sit in the plastic chair beside you. That's all. Just that. Let someone sit in the chair.